Carl.
Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. This time we're going to be talking about shamanism. Our guest is Joan Halifax, a medical anthropologist who has worked with shamans and medicine people in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. In her academic work, Dr. Halifax has taught in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Miami School of Medicine and at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. She is the director of the Ojai Foundation and author of Shamanic Voices and Shaman, the Wounded Healer. What is a shaman?
Charlie, a shaman is an individual found mostly in indigenous cultures, that is what you could call primitive cultures, who is a healer, a visionary, a sacred politician, and one who walks on the threshold between ordinary waking reality and the dream.
In the American Indian tradition, is that the medicine man?
Yes, it is exactly the medicine man. And so we find all over the world, in Asia, South America, Mexico, Oceania, and Africa, individuals who are known as shamans, who carry, in a way, the lineage of a very ancient knowledge that probably arose during the Paleolithic, during the very ancient times that we know in the West as the Paleolithic, 20, 30,000, maybe even 100,000 years ago.
We probably don't know who was the first shaman. Do we know from our study of anthropology why there was a first shaman?
We can project why there was a first shaman, and that is that between the experience of disease and the experience of death, the experience of suffering, of hunger, of various forms of privation, there needed to be a translator for the human community of through song, through ceremony, of why human beings suffer. And so the shaman is that translator.
To some sophisticated Westerners, we look at the shaman as a bunch of hocus pocus and someone who, for lack of a better explanation, drew on some traditions kind of things. For other people who have a little more open mind and look at it, we look at it as someone of tremendous power and mystical abilities. Does either stereotype describe what's really happening in the shamanic culture?
Well, the shaman is a very unusual individual, is not unlike our doctor or our psychotherapist. The shaman has his own technology or her own technology, her own wisdom gained from vast experience with plants and animals and minerals and knowing about human problems. And what, though, is very important about the shaman from our perspective today in relation both to technology and specialists, whether they're physicians or scientists, is that the shaman is very sensitive to context. Not simply interested, for example, in one little problem or one little individual, but is, for example, interested in the individual in relation to the social group in relation to the environment, and perceives the environment as being infused with spirit, as being alive in a very particular kind of way. So this context sensitivity is something that makes shamanism, well, it's one of the things that makes shamanism interesting to anthropologists and to people who are studying the human psyche. I think another reason why shamanism is of interest to us today is that the psyche, as described by Freud and by Jung, is something that is of has a sort of limited description, and the shaman is a technician of the mind, is one who goes into an altered state of consciousness, into a trance or into an ecstatic state, and in this altered state of consciousness is able to be frequently more lucid than most of us are in ordinary states of consciousness. So that specialists in the human mind are very interested in how the shaman has acquired these skills of the psyche, and are also interested in the specific content of the psyche that the shaman seems to come in contact with. And it seems that this content is not exclusive to shamans, but seems to be a content which is resident within all of our human minds.
Does becoming a shaman, do you put on the cloak of the shaman and fit the role? Do you grow up into it? How do you get to that ability to transcend normal human consciousness?
Well, a shaman is called into the vocation. Unlike us who would go to a vocational counselor to find out what we're supposed to do, or responding to our mother and father's suggestions that we should be a lawyer or a doctor, a shaman looks within, and looking within is guided through what he or she perceives to be spiritual direction to become a shaman. One can become a shaman, for example, through hereditary factors. Your grandfather was a shaman, or your father, or your uncle, or your mother, or manifest a proclivity or a tendency toward this as a child, or there can be signs at your birth, or you can go through an initiation experience. But really, the true calling of the shaman is crisis. An individual who goes through a psychological and physical crisis of such proportions that their world comes totally apart. But they would not be a shaman if they had not been able to weave their world together again. So in my book, Shaman, Wounded Healer, really there's another part to that title. It's Healed Healer. The shaman becomes an example in the culture of one who is self-healed. I think this is one of the reasons why shamanism is of interest to Westerners today, because many individuals who are diagnosed with the diagnostic term of schizophrenia, some psychiatrists believe that in fact these individuals are not necessarily sick in the Western, from the Western point of view, but that their schizophrenic reaction is a reaction, a correct response to a chaotic world around them and to the shock that they have gone through in relation to the chaos external to them. So that a number of psychiatrists have examined shamanism as a explanatory system, a method, and the role of shaman as one which gives mental disease coherence within our own cultural framework.
And after all, it is a pretty crazy world, so
I would say.
Was this a method for assimilating those elements of any given society that wouldn't have fit in otherwise? Was this a position or an area that was created where in any group of people, in any tribe or village or extended family, there are always going to be a couple of black sheep or oddballs or people who didn't, and they got to be this other thing and were able to express themselves in a way that was different than everyone else?
Well, I think this is true for some shamans, but not true for many shamans. In fact, the unusual qualities of the shaman are qualities that have a lot of prestige attached to them. I have a very close friend who's a shaman in Mexico, Don Jose Matsua, who's 108 years old. And you ask him, abuelo, grandfather, what do you do? He says, I'm a farmer. He's just an ordinary human being. He goes out to his cornfield every morning, right at dawn, even at this age. And he clears away the jungle growth, and he takes care of the elote, the corn. And then just before dusk, he comes home, and he has maybe 3, 4, 5 people sitting in front of his little hut waiting to be healed. And he works on them until sometimes 10, 11 o'clock at night. He's completely humble, extraordinarily healthy, has a memory that is longer than any memory I've ever encountered, and wider. He's able to sing ceremonies that last for 3 and 4 days, all by himself. He has extraordinary physical energy. He has one of the most naughty humors I've ever encountered. I mean, he's just absolutely an amazing man. Loving, hilarious, vital, intelligent, extremely intuitive. I mean, he's a person of rare gifts. So, the shamans I've encountered in most cultures, not all of them, but many of them are individuals who are extremely gifted, whose gifts have been awakened through the encounter with crisis, and who are ultimately not oddballs in their society, but in fact the individuals who help bring about harmony within the social world that you and I experience a lot of disharmony in. So that what was a source of illness for them, in fact, becomes a means of bringing health to the social realm.
Is shamanism something that occurs naturally?
What a wonderful question. Before we started this interview, I said, "Do you know anything about shamanism?" And you said, "No." I'll just ask a lot of stupid questions. These are my favorite kinds of questions, the ones I've never been asked before. Shamanism, I believe, is naturally occurring. Because what shamanism is a basic awakening of the deeper content or the deeper structures of the human mind. What is unnatural about our situation in relation to shamanism is that we repress this deeper content. It leaks out in dreams, it comes through in fantasies, it breaks through in psychosis. But it's something that is considered too threatening for most individuals to experience. So it's suppressed until it builds up and suddenly bursts forth in a way that's very uncomfortable for many people. So shamanism provides a vehicle or a means for not only the shaman, but for other people in the culture to tap into deeper levels of their mind and to experience them directly and to exorcise negative experiences in such a way they come into conscious awareness and the energy associated with them is drained off, and to go into experiences of bliss and of harmony, of well-being.
Is it necessary when we hear of holy people, oftentimes they're hermits, people who live apart from the others and have their own little world, and once in a while they touch base, but not too often. Is it an essential ingredient of shamanism that you have a lot of interpersonal contact so that you are involved in a healing process and the feelings that you're having and the differentness that you're experiencing can be shared with more people?
Well, a part of the shaman's initiation involves a retreat from the everyday world. But in the process of the retreat, of the withdrawal from the everyday world, the shaman realizes that his or her true job is in society. And so there's a return to the world of ordinary life and a very profound engagement with community.
If shamanism does occur naturally, and you have suggested perhaps the answer that it is just suppressed, where are the shamans in the United States? Where are the shamans in California, specifically in San Francisco?
In the mental hospitals. Yes, in the mental hospitals. And there are many individuals that I've encountered who, I think it's rather pretentious to say in Western society, this person's a shaman. I mean, it's not a socially acceptable role. It's not something that we, have a place for in terms of saying, Joe Blow is a shaman. But individuals who are very gifted, I've met many young physicians whom I would consider to be shamans, who have great knowledge of medicines and of how the physical body works, and who also are natural healers. I've met poets and writers and artists of all kinds and singers who have definite traits of shamans. I've met social reformers whom I would consider to be shamans, and of course therapists of many different descriptions who figure into that role. I think, Charlie, what's happening today with regards to shamanism is that the amount of suppression of this deeper content of the human mind has created a tremendous energy associated with it. And whether it comes out in terms of madness, and the society rejects the individual, describes him as incompetent and insane, and basically takes the individual's power away and hospitalizes them, or it comes out in a more in a healthier form, in terms of Western society, where the individual's artistic abilities are channeled, and where the individual finds a way to be a master of two worlds, of the world of insight, of intuition, of vision, and the world of ordinary existence. And this is what a true shaman is about. It's one who lives in both worlds simultaneously.
What are some of the things that shamans do that are cross-cultural, that affect all people that are shamans?
Right. The shaman's job as a healer is of primary importance. The shaman not only heals an individual, but heals the individual's relationship to society, the group's relationship to the natural environment, and is a bridge between the gods, the spirits, the ancestors, and the human realm.
Okay, if I can interrupt for just a second. There is a stereotype which I've been trying to suppress, and it won't be suppressed any longer. It's the John Wayne movie where the medicine man is a really bad character, is unaccepting of the new situation. The child is dying in the teepee. The medicine man is going through his healing process. It ain't working. The kid is going to die, and so they have to bring in the Western doctor, and the tension's really on because if the Western doctor doesn't do it, all the settlers are going to be wiped out. There's about 86 movies that they've done off the same plot, and the Western physician heals the child, and everybody lives happily ever after. Does it really work? Did it work, and does it continue to work?
Sometimes. I mean, they're both stereotypes. I mean, you can run the opposite scenario. You can say that the Western doctor is in there trying to heal the child, and he's absolutely against the wall. He's completely impotent. The child's disease is galloping away, and there's nothing he can do. The parents are tearing their hair out. And what happens? Arrives the shaman with his prayer arrow in his hand and his crystal, and he, passes his hands over the body of the child, and suddenly the disease magically disappears. I mean, both things are true. And I've seen both things happen. I've seen shamans fail miserably. I've seen Western practitioners fail miserably, and the magic people come in and do their magic, and the miraculous healings happen.
Give me an example of one of those.
I'll give you a personal example.
Okay.
I know I'm not supposed to speak personally, but I had tumors on my cornea, which were removed last September, followed by radiation. The radiation was not sufficiently fractionated, which is a nice way of saying they overdosed me, which means that I had radiation burns on my eyes, which is rather a nasty thing to happen, which meant I was in bandages for 2.5 months, and then a Lakota medicine man, who is my adopted father, Wallace Black Elk, came to the Ojai Foundation where I live and did a ceremony. Now, in the meantime, I'm seeing the top cornea specialist in the world. This thing with my eyes is a tragedy. He's basically said to me, you have to be in bandages for at least 2 more months to a year. I'm a very active person. I travel all over the world. I have, an extremely demanding schedule, besides which it's not great being blind. Grandfather Black Elk shows up with Grandmother Gray Spotted Eagle, does the ceremony on a Sunday evening. There are an incredible number of people who show up for this. I don't even know what is going on. I'm so out of it. The next morning, I take my bandages off, and my eyes are healed. The next day, I go, I must be crazy. I mean, I've been around this stuff for years, but it's disturbing when it happens to you, even if it's helpful. I go, well, I've got to get this thing worked out. I go down to see my doctor in Los Angeles, who takes me on a special appointment. He takes the bandages off again, because I don't believe I've been healed. He takes the bandages off again. He looks at my eyes. He said, he said, what happened? He said, look, if I weren't a doctor, I'd call this a miracle. Can you tell me what happened? I mean, and 3 days later, I was on the plane to Asia. So it's one, I mean, I've seen this happen to other people, and I, can barely swallow it, but to have a Lakota medicine man and his, half-side, his wife, just show up and do this in the way they did it. And admittedly, I am, their adopted daughter, and there's a very deep connection and love between us. But still, it was a bit much, even for this anthropologist to digest.
We interview on Infinity a number of scientists, and we always ask them about objectivity in the scientific process, and the scientists attempt to keep themselves out of the experiment. And there are more and more scientists who are suggesting that really that is impossible, that by By being an observer of the scientific process, then you are involved in the scientific process and you affect the scientific process. So the results are really not the same as if they happened in a vacuum somewhere away from observation. In this instance, how critical is it for the effect of the shaman that the subject is involved in that process? Does it work on a non-believer? Could he come in and have that impact on someone who didn't have a strong emotional bond to him?
Yes. I mean, I've seen it happen. Again, let me just respond to the earlier part of your question. A friend of mine who's a Métis, he's a breed, Hayameya Storm, wrote Seven Arrows and Song of Heyoka. He and I were having a conversation about the scientific method. And I was saying, well, one thing for sure is that, at least I think, as an anthropologist and from colleagues of mine who are in the sciences, including physics and neurobiology, it appears as though this universe that we live in and all aspects of it is not only non-verifiable, but non-repeatable. And Hayameya Storm started laughing, and he said to me, Joan, my rule is you should never attempt to verify. You should only clarify. And this to me seemed a very good rule by which to operate, because in anthropology we have what's called the participant observer. In early anthropology we were not participant observers, we were observers. But our very engagement with the culture was necessary. Not only necessary, it was just obviously what it was. By being there, we were suddenly a participant, not just an observer. And now young anthropologists and renegade anthropologists are recognizing that you can't even say we're observers anymore. That's beginning to break down because we're beginning to discover that we are part of the experiment itself, not simply as an observing ego, but in fact as a fully engaged participant. So, Charlie, I would agree totally with you that the breakdown in the participant observer is full on the rock right now.
You had a conference last year in which you brought some wise people from all different traditions and all over the world to the Ojai Foundation. Can you tell us why you did that and what was accomplished?
The Ojai Foundation is a veritable crucible of learning, and we have brought teachers from all over the world with different traditions, including the discipline and the traditions of Western science, biology, neurobiology, physics, and so on. And there have been occasions where scientists and shamans have encountered one another, but certainly not on a big scale. Well, in many different traditions, there are prophecies indicating that shield carriers, that lineage holders from different traditions in this era would come together and would exchange shields, would exchange the tricks of their trade, would trade their tricks, would exchange secrets, and where they would come to a sense of respect and honoring of the differences and come to an understanding of the totality of all this wisdom. So I have been very inspired by this since I was a young anthropologist at Columbia doing cross-cultural work, of not wanting to create a kind of syncretic, homogeneous situation, but where we could understand cultural diversity directly, and where people from different cultures and different traditions could meet one another and come to a sense of great honoring of the differences and see that the differences in fact were a key to our survival, not an obstacle to our survival, as seems to be the case on the planet today. So this was a very big step in that direction. We brought medicine people from Australia, Africa, all over Asia, all over the Americas together with Western scientists, psychiatrists, neurobiologists, biologists, mathematicians, physicists. It was an extraordinary event. It was dangerous. It was like a kind of cultural global alchemy, bringing diverse elements into the alchemical retort and realizing that the interaction between these elements would yield a whole new substance. And at first the substance looked slightly unstable, and that's what happens when you take a chance like this. I mean, you don't bring a Wallaga Lake shaman from the Yuin tribe in northwestern Australia together with a physicist and expect there to be peace and harmony the first moment. But I'll tell you something. every elder from the indigenous peoples who came to the gathering, and this lasted for a month, if you can believe it, and involved people like Ronnie Lang and Rupert Sheldrake. I mean, this was no small group of entities, but it was extraordinary. Every elder from indigenous peoples, whether it was Hopi land or, Australia or Lakota Indian, everyone said they had the same dream, that there was a prophecy in their culture that this was going to happen, and that this was the first time such a meeting, such a gathering of shield carriers had ever taken place, and it could only have happened at this time and in the United States. So from that, a lot has unfolded. I mean, it's, it's a joy, because as I said at first, the situation looked a little unstable, and it takes a certain amount of trust to get through the skill and cryptas, the clashing gates of differences. But now, I was just over in Amsterdam, and the people who came here to the United States from Europe met the Australian medicine man and brought him to Amsterdam to meet with Robert Mueller, the United Nations, and many other such encounters, and chemicalizing of people and of traditions is happening as a result of this giant step we took in May of '84. So what shamanism is so interesting for us today is because shamans have a tremendous respect for the natural environment. Indigenous peoples across the world are trying to maintain harmony and balance within the natural environment, because if nature begins to go and is overwhelmed by culture, then we do face famine. We do face a quality and level of disease which is incomprehensible to us now.
The shamans traditionally have been very associated with their local community, their extended family. And yet what you're talking about is the global community. Has that giant step already been taken? And is it as easy for the shamans as it is for you to explain it?
I tell you, I think it's easier for shamans than it is for me and you. Because a shaman is a master of two worlds. And so that stepping from a local situation to a global situation is maybe not as difficult as stepping from the world of visions into the world of ordinary life. So, for example, when Don Jose Matsua, this old Huichol shaman, first came to the United States, we didn't bring him to California, we took him to New York City. And I'll never forget this. We were in a restaurant in New York City. Everyone thought it was Don Juan of Carlos's book. And he's just such an amazing looking old man. He's on the cover of Shaman Wounded Healer. And he was, he eats meat, and so he has an amputated arm. So I'm cutting up this New York steak for him, and I give him a bite. And the whole restaurant is just rubbernecking the scene. I mean, here's this old man in white clothes that are embroidered with brilliant colors, and white deerskin sandals, and a beautiful big straw hat filled with, the crown of which is bursting with hawk feathers, and their wonderful beaded dangles around the rim of the hat, and he has a face you would not believe. And so he takes 3 or 4 bites of the meat, and he spits it out on the plate, and he says, "Juana, es muerto, it's dead." And I say, "Pues abuelo, what do you mean?" He says, "This meat is dead. It has no life energy force." He said, "Juana, it's worse than dead. It's rotten." So their idea of food is that food carries vitality. And to eat food that's been hanging around a bus stop for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or meat that's been hanging in a refrigerator for weeks, it's lost all its life energy force. It's dead. It's worse than that. It's rotting. So in order to be physically healthy, you need to eat food that is living food. And he said, "Juana," he said, "New York," he said, "you live in cuevas. Juana, tú vivas en una cueva." You live in a cave. He said, "No wonder the sun never comes out here. You people live in a cave. You never come out. You never sing to the sun. The sun is so sad." He said, "Let me tell you something. The sky will never clear. It'll never be clear. The sun is so sad because you live like this." And he said, "The life energy force, the kapuri."